Hello everyone. I want to apologize in advance for my shaky camera. I actually cannot. This is the first time in a while I've made a video at my house and I cannot find any of my recording equipment anywhere. So all I could find was this selfie stick so I'm going to have to hold the camera myself while I make this video. So today I want to share how my 4 children learned everything they know without any daycare, kindy or school. So I felt inspired to share this because I have been hearing about other people's children who have started school not long ago for the year and how they're progressing. And I love to hear from parents how their children are doing at school. I like that they celebrate this in their child. And I wanted to celebrate that my children are ready for another year of unschooling and learning at home. If there is any confusion around why I didn't send any of my kids to daycare and some of them never went to kindy or school, then how am I a daycare mum? How do I have a business that supports families who do send their children to daycare and school? That's because I am very passionate about unschooling and about this way of learning for children, that I wanted to create an environment for children who can thrive and benefit the same way that my own children did. So I'm going to talk about the different subjects briefly and how my children learned those subjects by never stepping foot in a school. So my eldest did go to school for 6 years before I discovered what homeschooling was. And in that time, I got to see what happened when he was forced to learn to read. So I'm going to cover reading to begin with. And because a lot of parents, the reason why a lot of parents do send their children to school is because they are afraid that they won't learn without schooling. They don't want their children to go through life not being smart and not knowing how to read, write, and count. But I'm here to tell you that I've seen that way and I've also seen a different way. And I have living proof in all of my children that learning is absolutely possible and guaranteed even without schooling. So I actually was a parent helper in my child's school when he attended, and I would do reading with all the children, and they never wanted to do this. They would rub their eyes, they would yawn, they would complain, and there were levels set out for each child, including my own son in that classroom. And something just felt off about it. I just thought, they don't even like these books. They didn't choose these books, but I just went along with it anyway. When I began unschooling, there was a time where I became so frustrated with the whole education system and how children are taught that I gave up teaching completely. I never made my children read another word again. I never made them write. I never did a single lesson, and that was about 13 years ago. So what I did instead was I allowed them to do everything that they loved to do. And one of these was video games. And I began to see how they were reading so much more and so quickly through playing games online and having to type things in and chat to people. They wanted to make friends, so they were reading words and they were then typing words back, which was helping them to spell. So this all sort of comes under the same subject of reading, writing, and spelling. And so I would sit there if they asked me to and read words for them, and they would slowly remember these words and understand how words were constructed through reading and researching things online that they wanted to know. We also traveled off and on for about 10 years, and we were exposed to so many more words than what children are in a single day in a classroom with planned out reading times. They had signs on the side of the street that they were reading so that they knew what town we were going to. They came shopping with me, grocery shopping, and they were reading the labels of foods. They just wanted to read because nobody was making them read boring books. They wanted to go to the library and borrow books that interested them. And they would go home and I would read to them if they couldn't read it, or they would read some of it themselves. And over time, there's two of my children actually never stepped foot in a school and have never had a single reading lesson in their life. And they can all read very fluently now and spell. And as far as writing, these days, with the way that we're progressing with technology, there is little need for handwriting. And I'm not one of these old school people that have the belief that we should do it like the old days and write everything with paper. Yes, I do actually prefer to handwrite because I enjoy it, but my children don't really enjoy it as much as typing. So they've become very good at typing. The main thing for me is that they know what they're writing. They can convey what they want to. They can communicate when they want. And they don't need to sit down and have a writing lesson to do this, to meet that need in themselves. And on occasion they do write. And I've actually been very surprised because I've seen a story written or something written with a pen, and I have looked at the spelling and everything, and I've thought, how did that happen? I have never taught my children how to write. So this just goes to show that children's brains are naturally wired to learn. It's just that we don't believe it can happen naturally. We believe that we have to teach them. And this is why when my children were learning to write, I never corrected them when they wrote a word backwards or upside down, because there is a process that happens with children in the learning to read and write. And part of that process is the formation of the letters not being correct. Like, that's an important process they have to go through and they have to be accepted for. And over time they did learn to write that letter the right way. I never corrected them. I never had to tell them. I just said, yes, that's your name. Yes, very good. And this gave them such a sense of confidence rather than correcting them and sending them the message that what they did was wrong in some way, because that's not actually true. That is the correct process for children's brains when learning to write. So the next subject I'm going to talk about is math. So none of my children, my eldest did do a little math in primary school, but actually most of my children have learned to count and add things up by just living their lives. Of course, video games has played a big part in that. Playing Minecraft and having to measure out blocks for making houses and having to calculate and problem solve in that game, having to craft items they needed. They would have to count the items. They would have to add things together and subtract and multiply. And I just watched them do this on their own. And they didn't need to sit down and be taught to count. And also we played a lot of board games. We played Monopoly, and they would often want to be the banker and count out money. And somebody actually commented not long ago on my 12-year-old's ability to count very quickly in his head without thinking. And this is a 12-year-old child that never had a math lesson in his entire life so far. And he's just, you give him a figure and he just calculates it immediately. And this is because he's played so many computer games and he's programmed games and he's needed math. So children actually need these subjects in life. They need English, they need math, they need science. And so we think that the subjects have to be taught to them, but we don't realize that children need these through everyday life to fulfill their own goals and fulfill their own passions. And I just watched as my children did this, and whatever it was they needed to learn, they just learned. So yeah, I gave them money to pay for things at the shop so that they were handling coins and they were having to work out how to pay for things and how much change to get. And this was very helpful for math. The next subject I'm going to talk about is science. So the biggest way that we learn science is through questioning and experimentation. And I never had to sit my children down and do a science experiment for them to learn science. Minecraft was actually a huge factor in them learning about like chemistry, because they would have to combine potions to make a certain thing. They would have to combine wood and other things and lava and water. Like they would have to combine materials to form a new material. And this was reflective of actually real life. So Minecraft replicates a lot of like what reality is. So they were learning, and then you would hear them in a conversation telling people how something's made because they learned that through Minecraft. They also asked a lot of questions, like if they had a pain in their body or something, why is this happening to me? What causes acid reflux? And we would encourage them to go watch a video on it. And YouTube can be deemed, like being on the internet can be seen as harmful for children, but it's actually a huge basis of my children's learning. So if you consider adults, like somebody's trying to fix a car and they just are stuck on something and they don't know how to do something, they will go and they'll watch a YouTube video and they'll learn that thing and then they'll be able to do it. My children have been no different. If they want to know something, they watch a tutorial, or they will look up acid reflux, and then there'll be a whole lesson there about stomach acid and foods that cause these things. And then they're learning in that way. They learned about astronomy by just traveling and sitting around the campfire and looking up at the sky. And each of them had their own device. So we installed like a star finder app, and they were able to line up the stars in the sky, and it would tell them the name of the stars and the planets. And they began to learn, they can now actually look up in the sky and know some of the stars' names and the planets and where they are and the moon cycles. And this is just through them asking questions and us explaining, and them having the app on their phone and watching YouTube videos and researching things on the internet. So science, they just learned a lot by asking questions. And whenever something would happen, like if they lost a tooth and they would want to know how like that happened, then we would tell them, we would talk to them. So science, if a teacher can explain something to children in a classroom, then parents can do the same to their children at home. So the next subject I want to talk about is geography. So my children actually learned a lot about geography through traveling and living on the road, because we had maps. We had physical maps that we would all look at together, and we also had a GPS, and we had Google Maps on our phones. So they all had their own device in the car, and they would put the maps on their device as well. And we would follow where we were going, and they could calculate the distance between one town to the next. They could switch to satellite view so that they could see if we were coming into a range or a city or something like that. And just by being out in the world and knowing and exploring different towns and different terrains, they just became very knowledgeable in that subject. And it really helped a lot too. And then they became very interested in the whole world. And so they would go on Google Earth and they would spend hours just turning the earth around and seeing where different countries are and traveling, working out like the distance from our country to another country by plane, and knowing what states were in what towns were in what states and countries. And they are so smart. Like they just know now where like every place is in the world, because they just spent years looking these things up themselves. So yeah, that's just a bit about what the subjects my children have learned through unschooling. So it just goes to show that they can learn through everyday life and just following their joy and doing the things they are passionate about. And yeah, they're very smart children, and it gives children much more confidence when they achieve something on their own rather than somebody telling them, do this thing because I said. And they figured it out for themselves. And I've watched my children have such a sense of pride and confidence from that, because they know that they can learn anything they want to learn, because they have all the tools and resources. They're not limited to books and lessons. They have the whole world to explore and learn through. So if you would like to read about my personal journey with unschooling my children from when I pulled them out of school and how they learned all the subjects, then you can get a copy of my book. So I hope you found this video helpful. I will be sharing about unschooling and socialization in my next video. So stay tuned, and I'm wishing you all a wonderful day. Bye.